Remember when Zellers was where Canada actually shopped? When a red cart and a Club Z card meant you could dress your kids, feed the whole family down at the Skillet, and still walk out with change in your pocket? When the lowest price is the law wasn't marketing, it was a promise made to every working family in this country. For 60 years, Zellers wasn't Canada's grandest store. It wasn't Eaton's. It wasn't the Bay. It was something better than grand. It was ours. This is the story of how it was taken away. It started with a man who understood ordinary people, because he'd spent his whole life serving them. Walter P. Zeller had worked the floors of Woolworth's and Kresge's, the great five-and-dime stores where a working family could afford a small treat. And Walter wanted something more. He wanted a Canadian chain, a store built not for the wealthy, but for the thrifty, for the people who worked hard, watched every dollar, and deserved a decent place to spend it. In 1928, he opened his first store on Dundas Street in London, Ontario, and almost immediately it was swallowed by an American company that promptly went bankrupt. Most men would have walked away. Walter didn't. In 1931, in the teeth of the Great Depression, he bought his stores back and started again, this time on his own terms. A store for thrifty Canadians. That was the whole idea. That was the soul of the thing, right from the very first day. And it worked, because Walter understood something the fancy stores never did. He understood that a mother counting coins at the till still deserved to be treated with respect, that there was no shame in paying less. That dignity and a bargain could live in the same store. Within 25 years, Zellers had 60 stores and 3,000 employees, a homegrown Canadian chain built from nothing for the people who needed it most. Walter Zeller died in 1957, but the promise he'd stamped on that first London store, a place for ordinary Canadians that would carry the company for another 50 years. By the time the Hudson's Bay Company bought Zellers in 1978, the little discount chain had become something enormous, and through the 1980s and 1990s, Zellers reached its peak. Not a peak of luxury, a peak of belonging. By 1999, there were 350 Zellers stores, coast to coast to coast. From St. John's to Victoria, nearly every mall in the country had one. For millions of families, Zellers wasn't a store. It was the store. And it had a soul you could hear and taste and hold. You could hear it in 4 words every Canadian of a certain age still knows by heart, where the lowest price is the law. That wasn't just a jingle. It was a covenant. Zellers was telling working families, you will never be beaten on price. You can trust us. Come in. You could taste it at the Skillet. The in-store restaurant Zellers opened back in 1960, later renamed the Zellers Family Restaurant. All-you-can-eat chicken and fish on a Thursday or Friday night. For a lot of families, that was the meal out. Not a fancy restaurant downtown, a hot plate on a tray at the Zellers diner, and it was everything. You could hold it in a Club Z card, one of the first big retail loyalty programs this country ever had. Every dollar you spent earned points, and those points turned into things you couldn't otherwise afford. A toaster, a set of towels, a little dignity, earned one purchase at a time. And at Christmas, at Christmas, there was Toyland, guarded by a chubby brown teddy bear named Zeddy. For a generation of Canadian kids, Zeddy was Christmas. Zellers would even send an employee in a giant Zeddy costume to host your birthday party. That's how deep this store reached into ordinary life. There was one more slogan, and it might be the most Canadian thing a store ever said. Only you know how little you paid. Think about that. It's a promise wrapped around a small kindness. Buy your kids clothes here, feed your family here, and no one at the school, no one in the neighborhood ever has to know your budget. Your secret is safe, your pride stays intact. That was the soul of Zellers. Not quality, not prestige, dignity. The dignity of the working Canadian family. And for 60 years, Zellers kept that promise. And then, in the space of a single decade, it all came apart. Not by accident, by choices. The first blow came from the South. In 1994, Walmart walked into Canada, buying up 122 Woolco stores overnight. And Walmart did something Zellers never saw coming. It beat Zellers at its own game. Zellers' entire identity, Its soul, its slogan, its whole reason to exist was the lowest price. But Walmart was bigger, colder, and relentlessly cheaper, and it only got stronger as its supercenters spread through the 2000s. Little by little, the lowest price in the country stopped being at Zellers at all. So in 1998, Zellers did the unthinkable. It quietly retired the slogan, "Where the lowest price is the law," gone, because it was no longer true. One of the ad men behind it mourned its retirement, calling it as Canadian as the flag, part of our vocabulary. And he was right, but it was over. That was the day Zellers lost its soul. Not when it closed. Right there, in 1998, when it stopped being able to say the one true thing it had always stood for. What came next was worse, because what came next was betrayal. In 2008, the Hudson's Bay Company was bought by an American businessman named Richard Baker, and Baker looked at his new Canadian empire and made a decision. He would pour money into the Bay, polish it, make it upscale, make it fashionable. And Zellers? Zellers would be left to rot. Stores went unrenovated, floors cracked, ceilings sagged. The bright, warm store of the 80s started to look tired and gray and forgotten. Ordinary Canadians noticed. Their store was being neglected on purpose, and then came the decision that ended everything. In 2011, the Hudson's Bay Company looked at Zellers, 300 stores, 60 years of loyalty, a place woven into the fabric of Canadian life, and they didn't see a store at all. They saw real estate. All those Zellers locations in all those prime malls were worth a fortune to the right buyer. So they found one. They sold the leases to the American giant Target for $1.8 billion and walked away. They didn't try to save Zellers. They cashed it in. The liquidation was brutal and it was public. Through 2012 and 2013, the stores were stripped bare. Merchandise, shelving, the red carts, all of it sold off to the highest bidder. And in a final indignity, the marketing campaign for the closing was called, in black and white, "Everything Must Go," including Zeddy. They actually made a video of the little bear being abandoned. The mascot that hosted your birthday party put up for adoption because nobody at head office had any use for a soul anymore. By 2013, it was done. 60 years, gone. 133 of those stores were handed to Target, and here is the bitter, bitter irony. Target Canada was a catastrophe. Empty shelves, prices that didn't match the flyers, a supply chain that never worked. Within a single year, Target had lost nearly $1 billion in this country. By 2015, after barely 2 years, it gave up and fled back across the border, leaving those big, beautiful stores standing dark and empty in malls all over Canada. Ghost buildings, where Zellers used to be. The company that killed Zellers couldn't even survive in its grave. For years, that's where the story sat. Just empty shells and Canadians online sharing old photos of the Skillet, of Zeddy, of the red carts, grieving a store they never got to say goodbye to. And then something that looked like a miracle. In 2023, the Hudson's Bay Company announced Zellers was coming back. But it wasn't Zellers, it was a small section tucked inside existing Bay stores, filled with cheap imported products, priced too high, nearly impossible to tell apart from the rest of the Bay. The name was on the wall. The soul was nowhere to be found. Canadians who lined up out of pure love walked out disappointed. It was a photograph of a memory, a costume worn by a company that had already thrown the real thing in the bin a decade earlier. And even that didn't last, because in 2025 the Hudson's Bay Company itself finally collapsed, buried under its own debt, filing for creditor protection and shutting down every single store. The Bay. The oldest company in Canada, founded all the way back in 1670. 3.5 centuries of history. Gone. And the little Zellers pop-ups died right along with it. Then came the part that should break your heart. With the Bay in ruins, the Zellers name was sold off, not as a company, but for parts. Canadian Tire bought the rights to the old slogan, "Where the lowest price is the law," in the most Canadian promise a store ever made, now belongs to a hardware chain. And the name itself, along with Zeddy the Bear and Club Z, was picked up by an unrelated Quebec retail group. In October 2025, a store called Zellers opened again in Edmonton, inside the corpse of a dead Hudson's Bay. A second one followed in Toronto this past June. The name is back. Zeddy is back. But you already know the truth. So, is Zellers back? Technically, yes. There is a store with the name above the door. There's a bear in the window. But is it the Zellers that was built for working-class Canada? The one where the lowest price really was the law? The one with the Skillet and the Club Z card and the quiet mercy of only you know how little you paid? No, that store is gone. It didn't fade away. It was neglected, then sold, then liquidated, then embalmed and put on display for nostalgia, and finally auctioned off in pieces to whoever wanted the logo. The tragedy isn't that Zellers closed, stores close. The tragedy is what it stood for. A homegrown Canadian company that believed an ordinary family deserved dignity, that you could be thrifty and still be treated well, that the lowest price could be a law, a promise, and not just a sales tactic. That belief is what we really lost, not a store. A way of thinking about ordinary Canadians and what they deserved. The name will keep going in one form or another. Someone will always find value in the nostalgia. But no child in 2025 will ever beg to visit the new Zellers the way you once begged to see Zeddy at Toyland. Nobody treasures the memory of a pop-up, and yet, somewhere in this country tonight, there's a Club Z keychain in a junk drawer. A Zeddy bear, worn soft, sitting on a shelf in a spare room. A grown adult who can still taste the hot turkey dinner from the Skillet. And still remembers exactly how it felt to push that red cart while their mother said gently, "Put it back. Not today." That Zellers can't be sold, it can't be liquidated, it lives in us, in a whole generation of Canadians who grew up in a country that for a little while had a store built just for them. And that's worth remembering. Did you shop at Zellers? Did you eat at the Skillet? Collect Club Z points or line up to see Zeddy at Christmas? Share your memory in the comments below. I read everyone. And if this brought back the Canada you remember, hit subscribe, because here at Canada Retold we're keeping these memories alive, one vanished piece of our country at a time.